G'day everybody, Sean from Bourbon Brothers here. Hope you're well. We're doing our November tasting videos. We are doing 2 bottles today because they're both from the same great distillery. We're looking at Four Roses. Four Roses, a brand of Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey produced by the Kirin Brewing Company of Japan. The brand's distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky was built in 1910 with Spanish mission-style architecture and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as Old Prentice Distillery. The company's warehouse for aging and bottling operations is in Cox's Creek, Kentucky. The brand and its products have evolved and transformed since the company's founding in the late 19th century and especially since the firm's acquisition at the beginning of the 21st century. By some accounts, the brand was founded by Rufus Mathewson Rose and was probably named in honour of him, his brother and their sons. However, several different stories have been told about the name's origin. Owner Kirin Brewery does not mention Rufus M. Rose in its version of the history and refers instead to Paul Jones Jr. as the founder of the brand. The company says the brand name was trademarked in 1888 by Jones, who claimed to have been produced and sold as early as the 1860s. It was originally called the Old Prentice Distillery and was owned by J.T.S. Brown. It was designed by Joseph and Joseph Architects, a firm with a history that has spanned more than a century in distillery design. The brand was purchased by Seagram in 1943. Around the end of the 1950s, Seagram discontinued the sale of Four Roses bourbon within the United States in order to focus on sales of blended whiskey, although it introduced other brands of straight bourbons in the 60s and 70s, such as Benchmark and Eagle Rare. Four Roses Kentucky Straight Bourbon marketing was shifted to Europe and Asia, which were rapidly growing markets at the time. In the United States during this period, the Four Roses name was used on a blended whiskey made mostly of neutral grain spirits and commonly seen as a subpar brand. Four Roses continued to be unavailable as a straight bourbon in the US market until after 1995. In 1999, Four Roses brand ownership passed from Seagram to Vivendi Universal and then in 2001 to Pernod Ricard and Diageo before being purchased by the Kirin Brewery in 2002. Kirin discontinued the sale of blended whiskey to focus exclusively on Four Roses Kentucky Straight Bourbon whiskey. In April 2019, the Four Roses Distillery completed a $55 million expansion project that coincided with the official launch of Small Batch Select, the first permanent addition to the distillery's bourbon lineup in 12 years, and something you can find in the Bourbon Brothers bottle shop. The distillery's expansion project began in 2015 and resulted in the ability to double the production capacity. The expansion project invested $34 million into the Four Roses Distillery in Lawrenceburg and $21 million into the warehouses and bottling facility in Cox's Creek. At the distillery, Four Roses added 2 new buildings and equipment, including a new column and doubler still and more fermenters. With the duplicate column and doubler still, production's capacity is scheduled to increase from 4 million to 8 million proof gallons, enough to fill more than 130,000 barrels per year. That Louisville-based architecture firm, Joseph & Joseph, that designed the original distillery in 1910, modelled the new buildings after the existing Spanish mission-style structures. Four Roses uses 2 different mash bills and 5 different yeast strains to create 10 different bourbon recipes. Their standard 100-proof single-barrel bourbon uses 1 recipe, their standard small batch blends together 4 of the recipes, and small batch select blends together 6 of the recipes. Limited releases and private selections can vary from the standard product, but generally maintain the same number of recipes as their standard counterpart. The Four Roses Distillery has also produced Bullet Bourbon for the Diageo beverage conglomerate. So let's take a look at the Four Roses Bourbon. It's a straight bourbon from the Kirin Brewery Company. It's from the Four Roses Distillery. It's an ongoing release. It comes in at 80 proof or 40% ABV. It does not carry an age statement, but it's aged at least 5 years per the company website. Its mash bill is an undisclosed blend of 75% corn, 20% rye, 5% malted barley, and 60% corn, 35% rye, and 5% malted barley. So Four Roses Bourbon is the company's entry-level bourbon and is made by blending all 10 of their unique recipes consisting of 2 different mash bills and the 5 different yeast strains. Formerly referred to as Four Roses Yellow Label because the label had a yellow coloration, Four Roses updated the bottle design, changing it to more of a beige colour scheme in the late 2010s. The signature of Four Roses' current master distiller, Brent Elliott, is featured prominently on that front label. So, let's give it a shot. So that nose has a gentle composition highlighted by floral and light fruit notes. Dried apricot, light peach, citrus blossom and lavender are most prominent. There's a light touch of spice that's also present, along with just a hint of fresh oak. It's light and it's well constructed. The overall aroma does a good job setting up the sip to follow. So spice amplifies at the onset, but stays within expectations for an 80 proof bourbon. Floral flavours create a general base, while apricot and peach pull through against a faint oaky caramel note. The mouthfeel is adequate and the spice increases on the back end. Straightforward and nicely composed, the palate's light, fruity floral flavours ultimately define it. Spice settles in and mellows as the finish progresses, allowing the fruit and floral flavours to continue as the highlight of the sip, though they fade against the light brown sugar and the persistent yet mellowing spice. While the finish offers a low level of intensity and makes little effort to leave a lasting impression, it's an adequate cap on the sip and surprisingly lasts longer than expected. So that's the Four Roses bourbon. Let's move on and have a look at the Four Roses small batch. So that Four Roses small batch, it's a straight bourbon from the Kirin Brewery Company. It's an ongoing release from Four Roses and it comes in at 90 proof, doesn't carry an age statement. It has a blend of 75% corn, 20% rye, 5% malted barley, and 60% corn, 35% rye, and 5% malted barley. According to master distiller Brent Elliott, while exact details vary batch by batch, the average batch size is approximately 250 barrels. Barrels are typically 6 and 7 years old, with nothing younger than 6-year-old, and occasionally barrels as much as 8 years old. As a result, the average age per batch is typically around 6.5 years. Bourbon from each of the 4 recipes is always used to comprise each batch, with 2 to 3 batches of each of the 4 recipes typically included in each of their batches. Because of the required flavour profile and volume demand, barrels typically come from multiple aging rickhouses to make up each batch. Alright, let's give it a shot. So, on the nose you get oak, citrus fruit and a hint of spice that lay atop a bed of caramel. It's light and it's approachable, but it's not characteristically unique. That mouthfeel is nice and creamy. It's a dimension of flavours that offers enough to create interest, and they manage to keep one another in check. While the flavours are all a little bit timid, oak, summer fruit, cherries, caramel and rye spice are the most prominent, I detect echoes of additional flavours, but they're so delicate it's hard to say what exactly. Four Roses small batch is easy on the palate, and while the combinations of flavours is quite pleasant, the delivery is so delicate it has me thirsting for just a little bit more oomph. But that oomph that I'm looking for in the palate, it comes out in the finish. Long in duration, the complexity of the sip shines here, giving into the dimension of flavours present in the 4 recipe blend. The flavours of oak, summer fruits and caramel come forward against a backdrop of rye spice and seasoned oak. It's hands down the best part of the experience and it invites you back for more. So that's the Four Roses Distillery, the Four Roses Bourbon and the Four Roses Small Batch. I hope you enjoy it and I hope you're enjoying your journey. Cheers. The brand's distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky was built in 1910 with Spanish mission-style architecture and is listed, I just said all that. A firm with a history that has spanned more than a century of distilling Distine. Nearly. Distilling Distine. The finish, the spice settles in and mellows as the finish progresses. Spice settles in and mellows as the finish progresses. I hate that I'm giving you that. Right.
The progresses, officer.
Swear I've only had a couple.